All right, guys, how are we doing today? Hope you're all doing well. As I'm sure most of you will probably be aware of by now, this man resigned yesterday morning, and it looks like we're going to probably have Andy Burnham as Prime Minister, probably sometime in late July, perhaps, if no one puts their names forward for a leadership contest, as far as I'm aware of how it works. So looks like Andy Burnham's going to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, or the next, obviously, leader of the Lib. I don't think anybody's particularly surprised by this. I mean, I think most of us saw this coming weeks ago, months ago, even. This was inevitable. When you've got a man that was an ex-lawyer coming into a position where essentially he's not really cut out for, a man who may have been good as someone as a public servant, holding the what was then the government, Conservative government, to account. He was good at that. He was, to some extent, relatively good, I suppose, in PMQs, but outside of that, as far as I could tell, he seemed to be a very indecisive, incompetent individual, quite frankly, and ultimately that's, among other things, what brought his time as Prime Minister to an end, really. Not to mention all the U-turns, not to mention all the scandals as well, and the way that he treated a certain segment of the population during the last 2 years, in which there have been riots, branding everybody with, a stamp of far right or fascists or bigots and all the rest of it. That clearly wasn't going to go down well with a lot of the public. And of course, recently with the terrible, disastrous results in the May elections, local elections, and then just, what was it, a week ago now? What if it's been 2 weeks, a week or two ago now? Was it a week ago? With the what was clearly, seems to me to have been a very well orchestrated, strategic move by Andy Burnham to put his name forward for the by-election in Manchester, which he obviously was always going to win it, because it's one of the safest Labour seats in the country, and given that people in that constituency were clearly very much sick and tired of Keir Starmer, it makes sense that people would essentially protest against Keir Starmer by way of voting for Andy Burnham, and that's what's happened. And here we are. So now Andy Burnham, yesterday, was sworn into Palm, I believe, and yeah, it's is what it is, I guess. Yeah, and like I say, was there an element of me that kind of felt sorry for Keir Starmer yesterday in his speech? Temporarily, yeah. I'm not going to sit here and lie about it. I did sort of feel sorry for him, just in a way, but at the same time, he did bring this on himself. He did bring this inevitable reality upon himself, for the reasons I listed just a few minutes ago. So I'm not in the least bit surprised that this has happened. In fact, this was always going to happen at some point. And the reason I believe that Keir Starmer decided to step down now is because he I suspect possibly because he didn't think. I believe the reason he didn't step down before is because he didn't feel that. I don't think he felt that the alternatives to his leadership before Andy Burnham was seen as a kind of real alternative were viable. So what that basically means that Keir Starmer might have. Not only did he see the inevitable anyway, with the leadership challenge being becoming a reality sometime in the coming weeks or months, he knew that was coming down the line anyway. And I also think that he may have felt that Andy Burnham might be the right person to replace him. That's my sort of way of thinking about it. Whether I'm right or not, I don't know, but that's just what I think. But I also think probably partly he just had enough. He'd had enough of all the media speculation. He'd probably just had enough of all the pressure. And, clearly many people close to him in his cabinet would essentially tell him to F off. Um, and quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, I don't know whether this is some, but I wouldn't be surprised if Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham had private conversations. Perhaps Andy Burnham had told him to, give it in, and I'll maybe give you some role in the. I mean, I don't know how it all works, but maybe he might be able to get some role in his cabinet, maybe, possibly, or something. I don't know. Or maybe he'll just bow out altogether. Maybe I don't know. But clearly, whatever the case may be, uh, Starmer's going to be out of number 10, possibly within less than a month. Or if there is a very serious leadership challenge involving, let's perhaps say, Yvette Cooper, maybe David Lammy, who else? Maybe Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner, West Street in potential. I think he's actually just. I think he's decided. Well, I don't know. Possibly West Street in maybe, and some others maybe. Then of course Keir Starmer will stay on until that is finalised. Whoever wins that, obviously. So that probably would mean that if there was a very serious leadership challenge, then that would mean that the next prime minister would be in office by, I think, September, as far as I know. But my guess probably is that a lot of people are going to put their support behind Andy Burnham because they'll want to get this over and done with and kind of move on from all of this kind of stuff before it kind of eats away at any shred of reputation and integrity that the Labour Party's got left at this point. So that's my suspicion, is that Andy Burnham will win, and the reason he'll win is because everyone will get behind him because they won't want to drag this out for a few months. And also the summer recess is coming up, as far as I'm aware, so I think they'll be wanting to get this over and done with, quite frankly, before the summer period starts, holidays starts, I guess. And then they'll come back as if you like, a fresh unit in the autumn. So that's my thinking about it. It was clear to me that this was never going to work out for Keir Starmer, and I think he's although he won't admit it, but I believe he's known this for a very long time. He's probably known for at least a year that his position just wasn't sustainable. It just was always going to end this way. And like I said at the start, all of us have known this. We all knew this was coming down. And the problem is that on a personal level, he may very well be a decent bloke, actually, and might be a relatively decent guy, actually. But when it comes to politics and his and how the public perceives him, he's just not liked. He just wasn't liked, and he wasn't liked by a lot of people within his own party, even in his own cabinet, because he was bringing the reputation of the Labour Party down. If that's even possible to do at this point, given the grooming game scandal thing and what's coming out about that, and Rupert Lowe's report recently come out of that. So it's the Mandelson scandal thing. It was just always, the damage had been done months ago, really, and it was really those terrible results in May, and the fact that Andy Burnham saw an opportunity to get back into Parliament through this by-election that was just the final nails in the coffin, and everybody, the media, general public, we saw this coming. We knew that this was going to happen, and he probably deep down he knew it himself. So the reason he went to Chequers over the weekend is because he clearly had already decided. It's probably sometime last week, probably when Andy Burnham won the seat, that he clearly must have already known. Well, he'd probably been advised. He'd already clearly been told that you've got to go. So it was obvious that this was something that was probably planned, as far as I can tell. And basically, in the end, he was backed into a corner. He saw no real way out, and so he decided to resign, not just to try and maintain any kind of whatever remnants of integrity and dignity he had left, but because he didn't want to have to deal with the humiliation of being defeated in a leadership contest. So he decided, show off a lot of advice, that it was better for him to try and maintain some kind of shred of respect from the public, if you like, to come out for him to come out and say that he's resigning as PM. But let's be clear here, because I don't think that my suspicion with Andy Burnham is that it will probably be, I guess, a bit of a flash in the pan period of popularity, if you like. Nobody really knows that much about Andy Burnham. We know that he was the mayor of Manchester for almost, a decade, I think. He's had a few roles, essentially, in government to some extent. He's been a member of the Labour Party for a very long time, by all accounts. And I think his role within any kind of public service, public servant kind of a role, goes back to, I think, at least 2001, I think it is. So he's clearly been involved with politics for, clearly a very long time. So, but whether he will be able to deliver as a prime minister is obviously yet to be seen. I don't suspect anything particularly grand will come out of his time as prime minister, but that's just my opinion. Like I said, I think he'll be. There'll be a flash of support for him, because people are clearly right now relieved to finally have got rid of Keir Starmer after so long, or what feels like an extremely long time, even though he's only been banished in 2 years. Although has been a leader of the Labour Party for, I think, 6-7 years now. So I think people will be glad to see the back of him. But what Andy Burnham will bring to the table could be more of the same, might be worse, might be slightly better, maybe, but essentially, give or take, it'll probably be more of the same. That's my guess. And actually, what this whole process that we've just witnessed in the last week really is really a symptom of just how ineffective our system really is. Because if you can just willingly give up your position as a mayor of a major city and take up and someone just willingly giving up their seat for a potential prime minister in waiting to take up in the event that they win it and then get back into parliament, to then seize or to try and seize that position, prime minister's position. That to me is not. I don't believe that's really. I don't think that's a right way to do things. Actually, I don't think that's really a fair democratic process. In fact, let's face the truth here that whether you like Keir Starmer or not, he did okay on a small, a relatively low turnout, I guess, but still he did win the 2024 general election obviously with a majority, and so Labour came to power. Yeah, partly that was obviously a backlash protest vote against the Conservatives, but still, he did win it. The Labour Party did win it fairly. I guess one would hope it was won fairly. So, Labour came to power. It was inevitable after 14 years of Tory rule that clearly there was going to be backlash to that. So you can't, what, like I said, whatever you think of them, you can't take that away from him. He did bring Labour back to power after, almost 2 decades out of office. So, but my issue is when someone comes in and tries to, when you have this leadership challenge thing, is that the person who's trying to gain the prime minister at that time's position through by-election, the person who's trying to gain that position doesn't have the mandate of the people, because the person that brought that party to power, in which in this case was Keir Starmer, he had the mandate from the public because he was the representative of the Labour Party at the time that was campaigning to get Labour into power for the last year or 2 years before the Conservatives gave up essentially. Not to mention all the leadership changes. I mean, if Andy Burnham gets into power, this will be I think the 7th prime minister we've had in just under a decade, I believe. So there's clearly something that's gone very wrong here. But I just think that if to me, that should go to the public. I think it should be a case of that the public gets a vote on whether there should be some kind of a referendum or something in these cases where the public gets some kind of a say. There's on some ballot paper that says, do you wish for the current government to continue for the remainder of its term, or do you wish for the leader of the party to change, in which case the government will continue for the remainder of its term in office. Now, that's what I think should happen. And clearly, if they decide that the government should continue as it is, or they don't, then then obviously that would be something that would have to be considered, wouldn't it? Or if I guess it would be a free. Do you want this government to continue on? Yes or no, or do you want this government to continue on with fresh leadership? That would be those would be the choices. Because I think that way it's a much more direct democratic process rather than the party just going through just cycles of leadership changes, every couple of years, which I think is destroying people's trust in the democratic system. I don't believe it should be down to the party to just have a say on that. I think when that party was given a mandate by the general public to come into office, the person that brought that government, if that person is that person's position's threatened or they decide to resign, then I believe it should go back to the public. The public should have the say in what happens from that. And if there has to be another general election, then there should be. And if they decide that, okay, we'll give them another chance with another leader, okay. But there should be some kind of a limit, I think. It's like two. That's it. You have two leaders. Are you allowed to have two leaders? I guess maybe something like that during a term in office, and yeah, that's it. I think maybe that's probably how it should work. I think, because otherwise you just end up in this never-ending cycle of just PR and optics and just trying to maintain power through any means possible. And that's like the thing with Andy Burnham. It's just a strategic move that he did, and he damn well knows that. He damn well knows that he wants to be the Prime Minister. He's not going to say that, and he's probably known that for a long time. It's just that, and in fact, he actually tried to run for leader of the party. I believe, I think 2 times. I think, if I'm not mistaken. So it's clear to me that he wanted to be at the top of that hierarchy at some point. And now he's given the by-election in Makersfield or whatever it's called, he's been able to do that. So it could well be that he gets to live out that kind of that ambition. So I don't personally, honestly, really expect too much out of him. I don't think that he's going to move too much more dramatically. Really, anything. I suspect it'll be just more of the same old. We're getting on with the job that the public voted us into office to do. Blah blah blah. Same old vague, hollow. A series of like sort of empty promises and platitudes and all this crap. It don't really make any real difference, because the issue is the system. It doesn't matter whether you have Labour in power, the Conservatives, or any of these so-called anti-establishment parties in office. I don't really think it's going to make any real difference, quite frankly, because it's the system that's corrupt, quite frankly. Or at least the corrupts. The system seems to attract people that are incompetent, or just don't really believe in anything, or they're too driven by ideology to the point where basically they don't listen to the public. And of course, the issues of parties bending to the will of their stakeholders, I guess you would call them, and it's a system that's it's more of a club really than a democracy, I would call it. It's all about internal structures and systems, and democracy kind of comes last. It's not these parties campaign on a manifesto to get power, but then when they get into power, the manifesto basically gets thrown out the window. It doesn't really mean anything, because either they just never really could get those policies through Parliament anyway, or they've crunched the numbers again, or they've just realised that, whatever the case may be, they just clearly don't think that it's effective enough to enact certain policies that they campaigned on, which probably they knew deep down they wouldn't be able to deliver anyway. But it just makes good campaigning to give people a false sense of security and a false sense of hope, which is essentially what a lot of this stuff is. A lot of this campaign is built on lies. It's built on deception. It's built on dishonesty and disingenuous claims. It's not what it's. Democracy to me is basically a bit of a facade. And I don't think, quite frankly, for the most part, most people trust it or have any real faith in democracy anymore. They certainly don't have any real faith in the mainstream parties. Hence the rise of Greens relatively recently, and the steady rise of Reform, and now the growing support for Restore UK. So it seems to me that I don't think that this kind of centrist, or what's deemed to be a centrist, status quo, centralized power in politics is going to. I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's likely to stay. I don't. I think those days are, quite frankly, are very much endangered. Really, actually, I really do. I think that certainly for the next general election. The thing is, it's like if Andy Burnham does this right, if he does, and I'm not saying that he's going to be a good prime minister, but we don't know. I guess we do have to give him the benefit. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that he is a relatively good prime minister, whatever that means, certainly compared to Starmer. What that might mean is that he gains some major support back for the party, and what that could mean is, although I think it's unlikely, but there's a potential that he could maybe just about scrape by at the next general election. Just possibly. But I doubt it. But that's my concern, is that he may very well just get enough supporters just to get over that. On the other hand, if he doesn't do it, that's Labour out of power for probably very long time, I would imagine. And at that point, you'll see people move to the Greens on the left, and you'll definitely see a lot more rise in populist movements, support for populist movements, and you'll obviously that being Reform UK and Restore, I guess. So my guess is probably what will happen here, as I said before, be a bit of a flash in the pan of support for Burnham. He will possibly gain some support back next year in May's 2027 May local elections, I suspect. So, and then the media will start then rallying around him to try and sort of fight off this, what seems to be growing support for Reform UK, Restore. Because let's face it, most of the mainstream media is whether they like to admit it or not, basically on the side of Labour, or at least on the side of the main parties. Really, I would say, I would argue for the most part anyway, give or take a few exceptions, maybe a few journalists here and there, or maybe a few, certainly this Sky News, Channel 4, BBC, clearly they're on the side of, very much on the side of Labour. Admit that because they're supposed to be impartial, but we all know that they're not. So, things like GB News, for example, Talk TV, they'll continue for the most part, I imagine, until Restore become a bigger party. They'll continue to support Reform UK because they still seem to me they're still having momentum. And as far as the results go in with regards to the by-election in Bakersfield, the only reason that people voted for Labour, in fact, they didn't really vote for Labour, they voted for Andy Burnham, hence the placards that we saw. Vote Andy for us, whatever it said, is that people were so utterly frustrated and let down and just up to just absolutely just sick to death of Starmer, absolute just fucking sick of it. That they just thought, fuck it, let's try it. Let's get Andy Burnham. It can't get worse, can it? Can it? That remains to be seen. We'll see, won't we? I suspect it'll be probably more of the same. That's my guess, quite frankly. But it'll be very much more of the same. Or it might even be worse. We don't. Nobody really truly knows what Andy Burnham really stands for. I don't think. I think he said things like he's very much in favour of like bringing power back to the north, and like very much in support of like renationalising things. I think seems to be in support of some degree of structural immigration control, but that's mostly for the means of visa programs, I think, and things like that. So he's still very much a very kind of very typical left wing. Maybe a little bit maybe somewhat, maybe a little bit more centrist, maybe in some ways, perhaps, but maybe a bit more radical in other ways. I don't really quite know what to make of the guy, to be honest. But it seems to me like he's someone he seems to be a very slippery individual, very cunning, probably quite a conniving individual, someone that's externally seems to be quite a humble, normal, down to earth, salt of the earth type of guy. But as a politician, in reality, is probably someone that's very much a strategic player, very much like Starmer, because that's the name of the game. That's what politics is. It's a game of. It is a game. It's a game of. It's just chess, political chess. It's just a game. It's a competition, isn't it? It's very much competitive. It's a competition of identities, of values, of beliefs, of policy ideas, and only a select few get to be in the positions where they can make a real difference. And so I don't know. I don't know really whether Andy Burnham's going to be. And I think let's face it, and as Keir Starmer actually said as well, with regards to Andy Burnham, he wasn't specifically saying Andy Burnham, but that's what he was alluding to, I believe, was that he didn't feel that essentially the party didn't feel, and probably he himself didn't feel deep down, although he didn't want to admit it for a long time, that he was cut out to be the kind of prime minister that would allow the Labour Party to win the next general election. And that's why, I believe, partly why he gave it up, because he knew that Labour couldn't win with him in charge. And he only gave it up at the very last second because he knew what was coming down the line. He knew a leadership challenge was coming. And he'd been told all this. He knew that this was all going to, the shit was going to hit the fan sort of thing. He knew that. And he knew that unless he changed, unless somebody else was allowed to become prime minister, he was just dragging the party down in the gutter. And he had to come to terms with that. And I don't think he really did want to for a very long time. For at least a year now, he's been trying to save face, and that's really essentially all this is really about. All of this speech, this resignation, it's just a last ditch attempt at him trying to save face. That's all. And to think that Andy Burnham is going to be some kind of revolutionary, individual that's going to revitalise the Labour Party or something. I'm sorry for that's for the birds. It's not going to happen. Can't see it. So he'll probably be Prime Minister by sometime in probably mid to late July, I think. So a couple of weeks away from now, if nobody else throws their hat into the leadership thing. So he would then, as he's put his name forward for it, he would then, if he gets the support, I guess, he would then become Prime Minister. So we may well be stuck with Andy Burnham for the next 3 years, unless, of course, they end up going down the same trajectory as the Conservatives did in the last couple of years in government, with changes from Cameron to Theresa May to Boris Johnson, to Rishi, was it Sunak next, and then Liz Truss, I think. So it's just a clusterfuck. Really. The last decade, and today, and this year, this is the anniversary of Brexit. Here we are, 10 years on now. Immigration's not still not being effectively controlled. In fact, it's gotten worse. And as we've seen in very recent weeks now, lots of migrant crimes are happening. Been a lot of civil unrest recently, and I suspect probably under Burnham's leadership that will probably continue. So there'll probably be more of that, more economic strain, more rising debt, more borrowing. Millions of pounds being spent on areas that, quite frankly, need new solutions, need new policy changes, but they won't do that. For business and unemployment, it's just the economy in general, dealing with immigration, education, healthcare, defense spending, bringing industries back, creating new jobs. Yeah, it's just more managed decline. As a lot of people have been saying recently, it's just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. That's all Andy Burnham's Premiership will essentially look like. So I wouldn't go getting your hopes up on anything spectacular. Until we root out the systemic issues in the system, which I believe predominantly mostly classism based issues, economically speaking, then I don't think you're really going to deal and this elitist attitude, this elitist system, and you've seen it all playing out now with Andy Burnham getting to potentially becoming the Prime Minister. That this slagging off rhetoric that you're hearing a lot of now, because he's from Manchester, or well, he was mayor there for a long time. This whole thing of the King of the North, and this whole thing of trying to put him in his place, trying to put him down. It's just so typical from the predominantly middle class and upper class establishment. These elitist types with their look down the nose at anyone that wasn't educated in Oxford or Cambridge. It's sort of typical superiority complex thing going on. So, and I'm by no means in any way supportive of this Labour Party as it is now. Maybe back in the day, maybe I might be more inclined to say, yeah, I think they're doing some good things for the country, in terms of what was happening in the 90s and early 90s. Yeah, I think some good things came out of it. But of course, there was a lot of crap things that happened during Blair and Brown's time in charge during the 90s until the 2000s, until, what was it, 2010, when the Conservatives took over, I think it was. So And let me just be clear here, by the way. I'm more of a kind of centrist type. I have some degree of support for some left leaning ideas, but I'm also interested in and supportive of some ideas on the right. So I don't particularly fall into one camp or the other. Although I would say that as I'm getting older, but perhaps in some ways, I feel a bit more strongly on some things on the right than the left. But I still think you need to have a bit of a balance between the two. I think I don't think it's good to have one or the other, in my opinion. But that's just my particular sort of political philosophy on it. I don't think it's very valuable to just have left wing dominating institutions. But I also don't think necessarily that it would be completely healthy or productive or good for society if it was only right wing based. I don't know. I think you have to be very careful with these kinds of things. You know, you can go too far on both sides, as we've seen throughout history. So let's just just put things into perspective here a bit. But having said that, with the way things are right now with the Labour Party and the Conservatives, there's just no way that I can get behind any of those two. And in fact, quite frankly, I don't think most Brits can. I don't think most Brits will be putting their vote into Labour or the Conservatives in any real meaningful way, unless it's some strategic voting for some reason, as we saw recently, this by-election, for a very long time. That's how I see it. So I think we are heading towards a shift towards the radical left and the radical right. And I suspect in the next general election, we've been just in the last day or two now, we've been hearing a lot about potentially a snap general election, which I think is very unlikely. But if there was a snap general election, my guess is it would be between the Green Party and Reform UK. All I suspect that Restore would get probably Rupert Love's Restore Britain would probably gain quite a significant votes as well, but it wouldn't be enough, I don't think, for now to gain power, to gain office. I don't think. Maybe after this, whenever the next general election is, the one after that, they very well may be in a position at that time then to potentially become a government. But I don't think for now. I definitely think they're going to start winning by-elections in next year's May local elections, 2027. But they're not going to. I don't think, as far as I can tell, they're going to be in government anytime soon. But that's just so. That's more or less all I've really got to say. Am I glad that this guy's gone? Yes, to some extent, and no, because I don't know what the guy who's replacing really stands for, what he's going to do, what he's not going to do. So we'll have to wait and see. But got to be real with you, I'm not really holding on too much hope. I suspect if the Labour does go on for another 3 years, it'll just be more decline, more inequality, more left wing, ideologically driven policy ideas, and institutional bias towards anyone that's not black, anyone that's not white, an ethnic minority, probably, with regards to local authorities, policing, etc., judicial system, etc. So that'll continue on, and I think, quite frankly, it could get very bad. It could get very bad under the remaining time that this Labour government's in charge. I hope I'm wrong, but given the way things have been under Starmer, it just doesn't look to me like we're going to see much in the way of resolution and fairness and real equality under this Labour government. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the local elections next year, or any. I'll tell you, what will be very interesting is when the mayoral seat is contested. I think it's in the next couple of weeks, I think, in Manchester, given obviously that independent's giving it up now. So that'll be very interesting. It would be very ironic if Reform won that, and Reformer, and Restore Britain are also throwing their hats into this. So it would be quite ironic if one of them won that seat. So we'll have to see how things play out. But that's all we can say. That's all I really can say for now. We'll just have to see how things go. Not expecting too much out of the rest of Labour's term in office, and I don't know really what else to say. I mean, that's I think that's pretty much all I can really can say about the whole thing for the time being. So I'll leave it there, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye bye.